again, everybody, and welcome to Tiger Sidelines. It's week number 2, season number 6. Alongside Gabe DeArmond and Dave Matter, I'm Bo Bayman as we get set for the football season, which is now a week and a half away. Over the past week, there was a scrimmage. Not many people saw it unless you're an Antler.
Right.
The Antlers got to see it, but so far things just treading along and kind of to the point of camp of if there's not really breaking news, that's kind of good news right now.
Yeah, it's time next week at some point. I think we'll get a new depth chart, and I don't know how different it's necessarily going to be, but that's really the next thing of much interest at this point, unless somebody's hurt.
Right. And that's the biggest point that you don't want to have right now is an injury. And they continue to get their work in, and now classes have started, so now you kind of get into the school routine, and next week will be game week.
Yes, classes started this week. There's 2 open practices for the media this week, so camp is essentially done. It's they're not living in the dorms and trekking over and doing all that routine, but we'll see. I mean, at this point, it feels like they're so close. I think they're probably starting a little more Wyoming preparation this week. They can't really prepare for the altitude, which is something that everyone's going to want to talk about, I'm sure. But yeah, it's almost here.
At this point, do you think, Gabe, that they're just ready to play?
Yeah, I mean, this time in camp, you're kind of tired of hitting the same guys and doing the same drills every single day. I think everybody's ready to, fans, media, everybody is ready for a game.
Yeah, no question about it. One thing newsworthy, 8 players from Mizzou on the preseason All-SEC teams, and you have 3 on the first team. I mean, a decent representation for the Tigers, I would say.
I think only 4 SEC teams had more players on the first, second, and third team, and 2 of them just had 1 more. So I think it's a really good representation. I mean, Missouri fans like to say that they get overlooked all the time on these teams, and by the media sometimes, but not this time by the coaches.
You got Garrett, you got Alberto, and you got Wallace Sims on the first team.
Yeah, I wonder if people were being realistic, if the first team would just be all Alabama and Georgia players, and then there would be another team. But yeah, I mean, those guys are the common 3. DeMarcus Acey is getting a lot of attention, which is pretty interesting. I mean, I think he's one of those players that people outside of Missouri think more of him than people who watched every game do, maybe. And I think he was better than Missouri fans thought he was last year, but left that impression in the bowl game, which kind of, I think, had people going into the offseason thinking, what do we have here?
Absolutely. And Acey came up on the second team. You got Duran, Elliott, McCann, and Roundtree on the third team. Not surprisingly, Kelly Bryant left off. That really didn't faze me at all.
Where do you put him?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And he just hasn't played in this league. I'm sure there's some thought that, hey, SEC is a lot tougher than the ACC. He lost his starting job last year, albeit to maybe the greatest quarterback in history of football. But, he hasn't played in a while. But this is his chance to prove it. I mean, he's got 12 chances to make himself an all-SEC player.
And to Gabe's point, where do you put him?
Because, look, Tua and Fromm are clearly the top 2, and Kellen Mond at Texas A&M put up some crazy numbers last year, and they're going to, they might go 6-6 and be the 10th best team in the country with their schedule. But the interesting one to me is Roundtree third team. I think is fair, but it shows you what the SEC is at running back. I mean, I think there's a chance he's this team's best player and his third team All-SEC.
No question. When you transition from camp to game week, is there a lot of difference or not really?
Well, you have scout teams, so the guys that aren't going to play this year or not going to have much of a role will be delegated to the scout team, and they'll stop running Missouri's offense and defense. They'll start doing what Wyoming does. And when you see that happen, I don't know if we'll see a lot of that this week, you can tell, okay, those freshmen, they're not in the plans for this year. That quarterback, he's running the scout team, he's not playing this year unless there's a bunch of injuries. So I think that's probably the biggest difference.
The other difference that's happened in the last 2 years, and Barry Odom talked about this, is with the 4 games before a red shirt, he says a lot of people are going to play.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to make that determination anymore till October 1st. I mean, he said last week Nico Hayes is going to play. I think we all expect Jelani Williams to play. Maurice Massey, I think, is pretty likely to play. Outside of that, I think they're going to wait till, that South Carolina game. And really, I think for Missouri, it's 3 games because game 4 is South Carolina. So you're not throwing guys out there that you're thinking, I wonder if these guys can help us. I mean, at that point, you're pretty settled now. A guy who played the first 3 games, I don't know, you might throw him in late in the season against Troy or whoever else you might play.
You'll see a heck of a lot of people against SEMO, won't you?
Well, that would be ideal if you're Missouri.
If not, Problem.
If not,
A few years ago against Missouri State, that was probably the plan too, and that was still kind of a game in the third quarter.
they can't overlook their first game. Not that saying that they're going to overlook Wyoming, but when you go on the road for your tester for your first game, when there's a lot unknown, you got to be ready.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things. Number one is this team's not good enough to overlook anybody.
Right.
But number two is if this is a worrisome game, if this is in doubt in the fourth quarter, it probably tells you that all this 10-2 talk needs to go away, because the chances that you're in a tight game with Wyoming and manage to get through this schedule at 10-2 are not very high.
Yeah, no question about it. Any positions still up for grabs that you guys know about? And if there are, who has the advantage?
At this point, if there's a competition, it tells me that both guys are going to play. You know, there's a couple spots like that. I punter still. I mean, that's the one where they haven't declared anybody as the number one guy yet. Maybe we'll find out this week.
A punter and defensive end just a lot due to health, but also due to the fact that you're not going to know until games start. Like, we're not going to see anything in August that says, oh, Jatorian Hansford's ready to be the guy. I mean, we got to go see him do it on Saturday.
No question. Now, as we get close to game week and get ready for Wyoming next week, going into the season with what you know, Dave, what group are you most relying on? Like, okay, this is going to be the foundation, whether it's offensive line, linebackers. Where is the strength of this team, do you think?
I'm tempted to say offensive line because I think there's maybe fewer question marks there. I really like the top two running backs. The problem is picking that group is there's not much depth behind them. But I'd go into any game with Larry Roundtree and Beatty as your 1-2. It's just a matter of what happens if there's an injury there. But otherwise, I kind of like the offensive line. And this in the secondary, I don't think there's as many questions there as maybe the fans might think.
And the fans probably think there's a lot of questions, I would think, if you're going into the year on the defensive line.
Defensive line, definitely. And I agree with Dave in that secondary, I think, looks better than it has. But again, you got to go see him do it. And, you know, linebackers, yeah, they got Cale Garrett, but they lost Terez Hall from last year.
Right.
And Nick Bolton is one of those guys who we heard a lot about last year, but I never really saw him do anything on the field that made me believe all that talk was warranted quite yet. So is he going to be the guy? Is Aubrey Miller going to play anymore? I mean, what are they doing at the second linebacker spot?
And then the other question for me is not so much tight ends, but what about wide receiver? There's a lot of guys coming back, but somebody's got to step up.
I've heard people say, oh, this is such a deep wide receiver group. I said, well, there's guys.
That's right.
Who's proven themselves? I mean, Jonathan Nance hasn't played a meaningful game in a long time, and we just assume that he's going to be, you know, a really good receiver. Maybe he is. Jalen Knox, we've all written this. He kind of hit a wall and disappeared last year. Cam Scott, you see the potential for sure, but can he do it on Saturdays consistently? Massey, the freshman, I mean, we've seen him make some great catches in practice. So they've got to really establish themselves as a group that can produce before we can really talk about them having any kind of depth.
But I think that position matters less than any other position on the field. I mean, yeah, if you have the guy out there, I mean, if you have a guy who does what Denario Alexander did, it makes a huge difference. But like, there's guys that catch passes. I mean, one of them may not have 1,200 yards, but they're going to be able to move the ball.
And that said, as a collective group, if they can be just fine and I don't want to say serviceable, but if you can do it as a group, you don't need to stand up.
And I don't think you need to. I don't think you should go into this season thinking Kelly Bryant's going to throw for 3,500 yards.
Right.
I think that's unrealistic. But if you've got four guys with 400 to 600 yards receiving, you'll be fine.
Let's talk about a couple of stories you guys did recently that were fascinating to me. The first one, Dave, you did on the coaching staff and saying that Barry Odom kind of bucking the trend a little bit.
Yeah, there's out of his 10 assistant coaches, he has 7 African-American coaches, and that's tied for the most in the SEC. It's far more than the average in FBS. The question is this a big deal or is this not a big deal? And it depends on who you ask. I mean, you ask some of the coaches, and they say, I think it's a reflection of Barry, the fact that he wants to hire the best guys. He'll go against the grain. Others will even go deeper than that and say, hey, you know, this team is predominantly black. It makes sense to have guys who can be mentors to them, and the natural mentors to a young black kid can be a black coach, whether he's old or young. Other people just don't see it that way, and I think the fact that there are two sides to the opinion is positive. I think that's healthy for this team, and I give him credit for it. It's harder for young black coaches to get jobs and to elevate their careers in college football. There's no doubt about it. And he's given some young guys a chance and also hiring some older veteran coaches too.
And it's a story in that if you look across college football in the NFL, 70% of the coaches are not black. Right. I mean, It's pretty low, I would guess, well under 50%. So if you look at it in that terms, it's certainly noteworthy.
And if you guys, as you've been covering in camp all year, you see the players sing the praises of their position coaches. I mean, so these kids love these guys.
Right, absolutely. And, in fairness, I asked about 5 or 6 kids on the team, hey, did you realize you have the most black coaches in the SEC? And I asked the African-American players. They were oblivious to it. And one of them, I think it was Aubrey Miller, said, I'll fight hard for any coach I have as long as I play. So that's what they're concerned about. But I do think in the recruiting process, just building relationships, I do think that's a factor there.
No question. All right, Gabe, on Power Mizzou, there was a story about Jordan Ulmer that was really, really fascinating.
Well, what a weird story. I mean, you want to talk about it. 2 years ago, he starts the first game of his career. And then people forget he's on the team. I mean, it hasn't had more tackles in that game than he has in the 21 games since. And now is back in position where they think he's going to help them this year. It really is a reminder, and we've had a lot of them. The first one I always go back to is Derek Ming way back when under Gary Pinkel. But if kids aren't making an impact their first year on campus, we all tend to give up on it.
Right.
And that's just not the reality of college football. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 years.
And sometimes you have to mature. And as a freshman playing.
And sometimes people say things in August that, I mean, look, Jordan Ulmer may not play this year.
Yeah, right.
To be honest. I remember I was joking last year at this time, I wrote a story on Terry Petrie. Like, he was the number 2 cornerback, and he was going to play a lot more, and he did, and man, after the Purdue game, he didn't play very much, and now he's gone. So, this is when we write these stories and either go, hey, look, I was ahead of the curve, or let's kind of pretend that one didn't happen.
It's the ebbs and flows of college football, no question about it. Hey, by the way, football's annual X's and O's, a night out with the Tigers set for Saturday from 5 to 8, Saturday the 24th, inside the new South End Zone facility. And attendees get, of course, all the amenities, and they get to see the South End Zone before most fans. And you can check more on mutigers.com, but that's something that I think, didn't Gary start that? And then it's kind of continued on?
Way back when. It started as like a women's football clinic.
Right.
The wives are instrumental in it.
And I'm surprised these things still happen, because there's a coaching staff that gets in trouble at them every year.
Texas
It's a little bit condescending. Come here so we can explain football to the women who don't understand
it. Mansplaining,
Right.
Yeah. And most of the women know way more than any man who's just watching, let me assure you, when they go to that. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we will check the Twitter feed. We are at Tiger Sidelines, and you're watching Tiger Sidelines right here on MC22. Welcome back to Tiger Sidelines, everybody. Bo Bayman here. This is Gabe DeArmond of PowerMizzou.com. And, of course, Dave Matter of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. We're glad you're watching Tiger Sidelines. We're at Tiger Sidelines on Twitter. We beg for questions every single week. Let's check the tweet machine. Dan has our first one. He says, how will the process work with only 4 members of the NCAA Infractions Appeals Committee participating in the Mizzou appeal? Could one person against it cause the whole appeal to fall through?
Now, there were five in there here, because one of the people that was supposed to be on the committee is from Georgia. He's not allowed to rule on an SEC team, so he was replaced. So there were 5. What I don't know is it a simple majority, or do they all have to agree?
The rules say a majority. Now, how do you do that with 4? You can find a replacement. A former member of that committee can come on. Now, they haven't
said
it.
And they did. I've been told Missouri he was replaced.
Well, then it's 5, and it's majority. The bottom line is it's kind of a moot point, because it's not like they release a scorecard. They don't say this one went 3-2 or 4-1. They just announced the decision. So I don't think it really matters.
There should be like a pollspeak.com for the appeals committee, and we can see who voted
They're not going
how.
to tell us who voted what.
Right. Or like after a boxing match, judge scored the match.
If they did, no one would ever serve on these committees, because they would be bombarded.
They might not be alive.
And we don't have any updated time or anything like that. As we always say, when we know, you'll know.
Yeah, we'll all find out together on whatever Twitter.
Yeah, whatever day that is. Steven says, suppose a healthy 2019 Tiger squad finishes the season 8-4 or worse. What happened?
I don't think 8-4 can be viewed as bad. 8-4 is fine. It's
kinda
not
the
great. It's okay, but I mean, if you lose 4 games to Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, and Kentucky, like it's not a bad year. It's not great. It's not a step forward. 7-5, I think, would have a lot of people going, "What are we doing?"
I think you make a case 8-4 is disappointing because the schedule is much easier.
Right.
I mean, the non-conference schedule is easier, or it should be, and also you trade
would
it out.
it shock you if West Virginia is actually decent?
It wouldn't shock me, but it would surprise me a little bit. And also, it's the first home game. There's no reason they shouldn't be up for that game. Also, you trade out a trip to Alabama for a home game against Ole Miss. You got to capitalize on that.
Yeah.
Well, the top 25 comes out yesterday. They play 2 teams in the top 10 and then 2 teams that are getting votes. And that's it.
Yeah.
If the rankings were to never change, they don't play a ranked team till November 9th. I mean, it's a month later than anybody else in the SEC.
I also think every odd-numbered year, Missouri needs to capitalize because 3 of your road games are Arkansas, Vandy, and Kentucky. Now, Kentucky's been good, but those aren't places where you go in like, oh, wow, this is Tiger Stadium, this is Alabama. You know, you should capitalize on those road games.
And you get South Carolina, Tennessee, and Florida at home in those years.
Right.
And we should mention one obvious answer would be maybe a season-ending injury to Kelly Bryant, because that would be big.
Bryant and Roundtree, to me, maybe Cale Garrett are the only injuries that, like I saw somebody say on our site, if Albert gets hurt, we go from 10 wins to 7. No one player makes a 3-game difference unless it's one of those.
Also, they were 4-1 without him last year.
Right.
Yeah. So there you go. Steve says last year's offense had a very balanced scoring with 27 rushing TDs, 28 receiving TDs. If the offense finds the end zone 55 times this year, how many would you guess would be rushing TDs?
31.
Really? I think it's more like 32.
No, I can't give them that.
So we'll set the over-under at 31 and a half.
Yeah. I mean, Kelly Bryant's going to run for some touchdowns. Not a lot, but he'll get some. Roundtree, Beatty, sure.
Don't you think?
I think it should be a lot. Like, I understand why he's here, and he's here to become a passer. But Missouri's job is to win games. You tell him what you need to tell him to get here. But now, based on what I've seen in camp, I would run that dude 200 times.
And if a play breaks down, he's got the ability to score that way. How's the basketball team looking, says Ian? What's the new recruits looking like?
We don't see practice.
Right,
so
I don't
it's
know.
hard to say.
And they can't officially practice with coaches now, right?
They can, it started, I think, this week or last week. But here's the other thing. I mean, we are 2 weeks from football season, and I get that there are people, there's a lot more of them than there were 2 years ago, that are just pretty much basketball fans, and they don't care about the rest of it. But for us, basketball just kind of, unless something happens, it's kind of on the back burner until about late October.
Yeah. All right, the next one says, should it be considered an embarrassment for Mizzou and the rest of the SEC that our AD thought the best way to deal with attendance issues at Faroe was reduce our seating capacity by about 10,000 seats? As an MU fan who plans on being at every game, I find it sad and embarrassing.
Twitter gets embarrassed about a lot of things, man. I mean, I try to make it a general rule. If I wasn't involved in it, I have no reason to be embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
How long has Jim Sturk been here?
Embarrassing?
This is fourth year. Yeah.
How many times has he seen a full stadium?
Never.
I assume 0.
2014 was the last time.
So why wouldn't he look out there and say, well, if we did 10,000?
I remember, and this is no exaggeration, it was 10 years ago, I was talking to a Missouri coach about the attendance, and this is when they were getting pretty good crowds in there. And he said, we don't need to add seats. What looks better, 71,000 in a 74,000 seat stadium or 71,000 in an 84,000 seat stadium? Because just adding 10,000 more seats is not going to convince, you're not selling out every day.
And also, let's remember, Faroe Field Memorial Stadium is very unique. A big section of that stadium, there's no number to compute what's on that north end zone. That's just a ballpark figure that's made up. So you can change the numbers around, and it doesn't mean anything.
And this is happening in all sports. I mean, Auburn and Ole Miss built new basketball arenas, and they intentionally made them like 8,000. And you know what? You watch those games on TV, and you think, man, that place is crazy. There's fewer people there than at Mizzou Arena. But Mizzou Arena looks like a cavern. Kentucky
football did this too. They reduced by 10,000. You know what they did? They built these premium suites that make so much more money than a couple thousand seats that they got rid of.
And if you get 3 years of 62,000 people at games, then maybe Missouri adds 5,000 seats. But not till then.
And don't be embarrassed. I mean, it's smart. We talked about it last week. There are more and more people who are saying, I can watch more games staying at home. I can drink my own liquor, and I can go to the bathroom right when I want to
Change the channel.
Absolutely. Dean says, can the three of you discuss the USA Today article on recruiting spending and Mizzou's rankings, which were very low? Do you anticipate a significant increase in spending going forward? Thanks.
I looked up the numbers today. Missouri recruiting budget for football ranks 32nd in the country. Now, that's right around where their revenues and their expenses rank too. So it's in line with everything else. Now it's second to last in the SEC, which is about where Missouri's revenue. They spend about $700,000, just less than that, which is about half the SEC. And I think they're doing fine with that. It's a 10% increase from the year before. They're in the company with schools like Washington, not far from South Carolina, Indiana's in there, West Virginia. So that's about the teams they compete with on that level.
And just because Tennessee spends $2 million, like, do you have to?
Right.
You know, why do you have to spend it just because other people do? I mean, Missouri's been better than Tennessee on the field the last few years, and I don't know about it, maybe they're towing the company line. I've never had a coach at Missouri, even in private, say, you know what, I asked for money and they won't give it to me to recruit. They all seem to have what they need.
Some schools, some coaches, they don't spend money very wisely. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I guess it's some kind of status symbol to spend more money on things like recruiting, but so much of it comes down to travel. Like, how far do kids have to go to get to your place? What are your hotel rates in town? You know, Columbia's might be more, modest compared to other places.
And Missouri has 8 kids from this class in St. Louis. That takes Barry Odom a tank of gas to go see all 8 of them.
And Missouri does, you would think, in recruiting, have to go far. They have to go further than most people. Like Texas A&M can stay in their own backyard too.
Yeah, but Texas A&M is one of these schools that they have money to burn. Like, they're probably spending money on recruiting just so they can tell the IRS, like, look at all this money we don't have. You know,
we spent it on recruits.
Yep.
I mean, getting recruits.
Right, yeah.
All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about women's soccer and where they're picked in the SEC Conference preseason. You're watching Tiger Sidelines right here on MC22. Welcome back to Tiger Sidelines, everybody. That's Gabe DeArmond, Dave Matter, and I'm Bo Bayman. As we check out some of the other sports that are about to commence here at Mizzou, women's soccer was picked 10th in the SEC preseason coaches poll, probably not surprisingly after the past couple of years. They did win against Colorado State 3-1. They have a home game against Southern Miss, and then they play Ohio State. The Southern Miss and the Ohio State is really the beginning of the season. Soccer, surprisingly, has preseason matches where they travel and go play.
Free door prize for anybody that can tell me how many teams in the SEC play soccer. Like, say whatever you want, because I have no idea.
Is it 12?
Sure, it's 12. Bo wins.
Yeah.
I have no clue.
I win the swag bag. All right. I win the MC22
I think
mug.
MC22 has some free tickets for you or something. You get to announce a Columbia College game.
Yes,
That's your prize.
there you go. By the way, the volleyball exhibition had the gold team beating black, and volleyball is going to be pretty good this year. Despite the coaching change, which we talked about last week, and we said that the Krecklos wanted to do it and hand it over to the Taylors in this manner when the team would be good instead of handing them a mess. They looked pretty good in their exhibition match.
I wonder, too, they're receiving votes in the coaches' preseason poll. They're not ranked. I wonder if some of that are the coaches, out of respect for Wayne and Susan, saying, well, they can't possibly be as good without them, and we're not going to rank them.
Rough weekend for the Black Squad, though. I had higher expectations for them.
Yeah.
I'm a little disappointed.
They did win a set, however, so that's good. And we should mention, volleyball will be on national TV 6 times this year, so that's always good for the program, especially when you have new head coaches and you have to recruit.
National TV or national, like, computer TV?
That could be. It could be computer TV.
It's a thing, yeah.
Yeah, that is a thing now. And that's interesting because you're right. I mean, it used to be national TV was a huge deal. Holy cow, we're on. Now everything's on. You just got to find it.
Yeah, I mean, you get ESPN Plus. You can watch some of the. You can get the Ocho if you want.
That's right.
Nothing beats regional cable, though.
Yeah.
No, of course not.
Football team not ranked. Huge disrespect from the AP, I thought. 26 in the country. highly.
As I wrote this today, Mariota missed out on $5,000 by just a couple of votes. Remember, he gets $5,000
right.
every week that they're ranked.
And and I really think the only reason really that people are all that upset about it is Nebraska is coming off 4-8 and ranked 24th. But I said, like, you can think Nebraska at 24 is dumb and Missouri at 26 is okay. Like, those things can both be true.
Right. I don't get Nebraska. I'm not a voter this year, so I can't say anything. But about
Scott
my
Frost
ballot,
went undefeated 2 years ago at UCF, though.
well, and they played Ohio State tough.
And they play in maybe the worst division in college football because the ACC Coastal doesn't count as a division. They had to renounce their membership as a division in college football.
Yeah, so Nebraska could make some noise just because the rest of the teams are terrible. But again, it was for fans to get up in arms yesterday that they weren't ranked. But
you win one game, you're probably ranked. You win two, you're definitely ranked.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, next week we get to talk about leading up to a football game. We'll preview Wyoming next week on Tiger Sidelines. We want to thank everybody behind the scenes. For Bill and Matt and Brian, that's Gabe DeArmond, Dave Matter. I'm Bo Bayman. We'll see you next week on Tiger Sidelines right here on MC22.